Welcome to Writer, a program for and about writers, brought to you by Florida Community College at Jacksonville. I'm Carol Spalding, your host, and with me today is Dr. Joan Borysenko, New York Times best-selling author, workshop and spiritual leader, and truly unique individual with a personal vision that transcends the boundaries of science, psychology, and spirituality. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you, Carol. I'm excited to talk to you.
Oh, I'm excited to hear about what you've got to say. Now, you're a very interesting writer because you're a medical person. You're not a MD, but you're a PhD from
Yes.
Harvard Medical School.
That made it really hard to write because when I used to write articles in the beginning for the general public, they sounded like journal articles with footnotes. And actually, I learned to write from a wonderful man at Brandeis who asked me to write a chapter on the mind-body connection for a college psychology textbook. And I think we went back and forth 10 times with that chapter. And finally he said, they're not interested in the biochemical pathways. Make it relevant to their life. Talk about, well, you know, here's two people with cancer. This is what happens to them. These are their thoughts, their feelings, how their thoughts and feelings might affect their body. And that was really the hardest writing assignment I ever had.
Oh, my.
And I think that's true for a lot of people in technical fields. Popular writing's a whole different thing.
Right, but you've made that transition very well. You've been writing for 15 years, and you
Yes.
have a new book out.
I do.
And it's, can you describe it and how you decided to write it?
Well, sure. Almost every book I write is an attempt on my part to make sense of my own life. A friend once joked that for me, books are a way of taking pain and turning them into meaning, which is true. And the new book is called Inner Peace for Busy People. And one of the things I'm always trying to cope with in my own life is how do you maintain your center, your juice, your creativity, your friendships, your connection to your inner self, and for me that's something larger that we think of perhaps as the divine or what's holy while you're running around. And so that's what the book is about.
Okay,
And
so do you feel the need to write and to share, or are you writing these for yourself?
I write them for myself, but of course I'm always hopeful that they're going to help somebody else. And that, I mean, that's ultimately always my hope, is to be of service. And sometimes people come up to me, particularly women, and they say, did we grow up in the same house? Did we have the same families? I've had such similar experiences, and it feels like reading your books over 15 years that we've grown up together. So, you know, thanks for being the big sister who holds the mirror up to experience so that we can all grow together. And
That's a very good compliment, I think, to your writing.
Yes.
Yeah, I know you do more than writing, but let's stay with that for just a minute. You've differentiated, I think, between being an author and being a writer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, when I think of writers, I think of somebody who can craft the word in an exceptional and memorable way. And I think of people like Barbara Kingsolver, who's one of my very favorite writers, or Annie Lamott, where you pick up their writing and practically every sentence is such that you just want to go, oh, how beautiful, how extraordinary, what depth. You know, it's like poetry. And I'm a much more factual writer, and sometimes I sit over that and I think, why can't I be like Annie Lamott? And I realize I'm predominantly left brain. These people who write in metaphor have tremendous imaginal capacity. And so I have to keep telling myself, Joan, you're a perfectly good writer. You're just a different kind of writer. But the way that I think of that is I'm an author. I create books from information and I put them down. And that's different than a writer with that kind of poetic heart and spirit.
How do you, as one of the most busy people, find time to write? When do you do it? In the airport, between planes?
I can't do it. I can't do it in the airport because once I get in the zone, I want to stay there. And in fact, sometimes I'll stay there for 10 hours. So I need to put aside blocks of time to write. And a block of time really can be as short as 2 or 3 days. But I'm happy if I've got a month or two, and then I can, you know, get generally a book done, although everyone is different. Some of them have taken me a couple of years. One book, actually, I wrote in about 3 weeks.
Well, do the workshops influence the books, or do the books influence the workshops?
That's a very good question, Carol. And I think it's some of both, because generally what's going on in the workshop is usually a reflection of what I think people need, often what I'm going through myself. And at a certain point, I'll think, now I've got a handle on it, and I can sit and really write about this. So they do influence one another, but not always. For example, I wrote a book called A Woman's Journey to God, and that had to do with my ongoing spiritual life. And, well, it had to do with the fact that I've been doing spiritual weekend retreats. We call these spiritual slumber parties for women with a retreat partner of mine, Elizabeth Lawrence, for almost 15 years. And that book, I thought, I'm going to draw on all the questions that women ask, all the places inside me that are unclear, in the hopes that we can live along into the mystery together. So I guess that is an example where the work I did definitely affected the writing of the book, but, you know, was a reflection of my inner life all along.
Mm-hmm. Are your books in the self-help section, in the New Age section, in the medical section, in the psychology section, all of the above?
I can't believe how amazing your questions are. That's one of the biggest confusions. You never know where you'll find my book. They could be in any of those sections at all.
And you have tapes?
I do. I have a lot of audio tape programs, everything from a 4-hour program that a really wonderful group, Sounds True, put out. And that's on, I called it 70 times 7, on the spiritual art of forgiveness. And then Nightingale Conant, which years ago used to do just motivational tapes, has done, I think, 3 programs of mine already on the power of the mind to heal, and on one of them is different meditations, the other's on a spiritual quest. And then I must have a dozen meditation tapes, lecture tapes. Sometimes I look at all of the materials that I've produced over the years and I think, how did that happen?
Well, I guess when you've got something to say, you need all those different kinds of media to say it.
I think people hear and take in information in different ways. Not everybody is a reader. And these days, people commute so much that it's wonderful for them to be able to pop a tape in the car player and listen on their way to work, for example. And now I've got a whole other thing, and that's music. This is something newly developed. When Inner Peace for Busy People came out, I collaborated with a friend of mine who also lives in Boulder. His name is Don Campbell, and he is also a writer. He's written The Mozart Effect, The Mozart Effect for Children.
Those.
You have those?
I have
Yes.
those. Mm-hmm.
And he really is one of the world experts on sound and healing. And so Don said, we should create music for people that will help them to relax. And he showed me a study, fabulous study. Half an hour of classical music produces brain changes equivalent to 10 milligrams of Valium.
Oh.
So that's pretty stunning,
What
isn't
does
it?
the other kind of music do?
Well, that's a very good question. I think some of it increases your adrenaline, it increases your sexuality. I mean, music and emotions, I think we've all experienced are such a tight connection. So we produced a CD, and it has wonderful music. Everything from Mozart to Gabriel Fauré to my very favorite piece by Ralph Vaughan Williams, which is a tone poem called The Lark Ascending. And Don was wonderful in really guiding the choice of that music. But now I'm in the midst of the production of another tape called Chant Your Prayers. And what it is a lot of people will ask me, well, what about a spiritual practice in the morning? And just as we gather information on different ways, I think we pray in different ways. Some people need to move their bodies, body prayer. They do Tai Chi or yoga or liturgical dance. Some can sit with closed eyes and meditate. And some people really like to sing. And so there'll be 9 chants in that series, and it will have to do with gratitude and praise and divine union. And there are chants from Latin and the Catholic tradition, chants from the Jewish tradition, chants from the Islamic tradition, and it was very exciting. The Hindu tradition, I had a ball.
Oh, that would be wonderful. There's so many wonderful black churches here that have a whole different tenor of how they worship also.
That's it. And you know, there's such joy in music or peace in music. It really runs the gamut of emotions.
I call music perfume for the ears. You know, it just sets the tone of whatever you want.
It does.
I find it very influential, and I think it's another way to get to young people.
Yes.
Are young people a group that you're trying to reach?
Well, I must say that the group that I reach is getting older and older. They're a mirror. I look out there and I say, whoops, aging baby boomers. Soon I'll be doing workshops on the joy of geriatrics. In fact, I've already done one.
Well, I think that probably the books reflecting your life journey appeals to people who are in similar stages.
That's right. But you did make a good point in terms of young people and their spirituality. Now there are rave masses happening.
Oh.
So that's really quite something. That's been the work of Matthew Fox, who's a former Dominican priest and the author of at least a dozen books. And he actually left the Dominicans and became an Anglican priest. But he wants to reach the young people, and you know, you reach people where they're at.
Right. What do you see as your next step? Do these things happen? These books evolve out of an experience, or do you now look ahead and say, oh, you know, in 5 years I want to do this or this?
They evolve from where I'm at, and I've done now 2 books that are specifically just for women: A Woman's Journey to God, and then another one called A Woman's Book of Life, that looks at our biological, psychological, and spiritual development in 7-year cycles, from birth all the way through to death. And shows, I wrote that because when I was hitting 50, I thought, oh boy, over the hill. And there wasn't any place at that time where you could really go and say, getting older is not, as Jung would have said, a kind of miserable appendage to life's mourning. It has its own very specific reason, its own specific beauty, its own really transcendent wisdom. And I wrote that book to help myself figure out, okay, what's the next part of life over 50? How is this evolving? And now I'm ready to do a 3rd book specifically for women. And the plan now is to take the Inner Peace for Busy People, which was for anybody, and do specifically an inner peace for busy women. You know, we're the big multitaskers anyhow. For sure, women in a domestic way still do most of the work, even though we're, quote, liberated. And if we work, we have 2 jobs.
That's very true. Do you see then the science, psychology, and spirituality, do you see more psychology here? Because you're working on these stages of life, which goes into, a lot of the psychologists did that.
Yes, and that was what I call a heavily researched book, where I had to go back and look at all the information on life cycles. I went all the way back to the Yellow Emperor of China thousands of years ago, because in the Yellow Emperor's classic on medicine, he talked about how women evolve in 7-year cycles. This was funny. He said at 7 we get our second teeth, at 14 we menstruate, at 21 the body is fully formed, at 28 our muscles are at our peak, at 35 our arteries start to harden, at 42 our hair is white, at 49 we're menopausal. And then he said, it's a rapid downhill slide to death. So,
well, then.
But men, he said, evolved in 8-year cycles and continued to grow in wisdom until they died. So I looked at everything, you know, from Freud and Erikson and Piaget to the Yellow Emperor. And of course, I love that. Being an academic at heart, I love to do the research. But you know what I find? People relate more to stories than to research. They really want it. Especially women. We want to hear the stories of other people's lives. We want to say, oh, she went through that too. She created meaning out of it. If she can do it, so can I. And people tend to forget research, but they will remember a story all their lives. So the next book will really be stories. And I think that's why the Chicken Soup series has been so very, very popular. And then, you know, all of the kind of knockoffs of that. There's all kinds of, you know, hot chocolate and this, that for...
Right, right. Let's talk a little bit about making meaning. I don't know that people stop long enough to make meaning out of this barrage of activity that they've got.
Well, it's true. That's what happens when we get very, very busy. Then the meaning-making apparatus doesn't have any time to really think about it. And we get really on the treadmill of how am I going to get done today, what I'm going to do. And it really does kill off in a certain way our access to our intuition, to that sense of something larger. And that's one of the difficulties. So we do need to look at that. When people tend to really make meaning is when the world stops, and usually that's around crisis and tragedy.
Or tradition, maybe. I mean, Christmas
Yes.
and holidays, religious holidays, where all of a sudden you were busy and then you add a holiday on top of it.
Yes.
You know, Hanukkah or whatever it happens to be, and then your life is just out of control.
Well, it is, and the unfortunate part is, I think that in whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Native American, whatever it is, you have a kind of liturgical year, whether there's solstices and equinoxes or Ramadan or Hanukkah or Christmas or Passover. And those were meant as times of contemplation, to say, what do these things, what does the birth of Christ mean to me? Am I being renewed? Is there a birth happening inside me? In these days, it's all about going to the mall, and that's a problem. And I do see that women are really hungry for something deeper, and that's what we try to do in women's retreats. Whatever holiday is happening in any tradition, anywhere near the time of the retreat, we will really take up to say, what does this mean to us? Originally, you know, all these holidays were keyed to nature because that was the thing we were trying to make meaning of, days and nights and cycles and seasons. And if we can take even a weekend to contemplate these things, quite remarkable wisdom emerges, Carol.
Well, in Florida, where we are, sometimes you don't even really realize the seasons are moving. The time has stood still. I think the Japanese had gardens with no flowers so that they couldn't see the time was passing. And, you know, I wonder if that has really had an effect. Air conditioning, other kinds of things have kept us from nature. Is that one of the impacts that you're seeing on people's lives?
I think so. Most people will tell you that if they're stressed or they just feel like life is too much with them, nature is where they heal. And almost everybody has a different kind of nature that appeals. Some the desert, some the ocean, some the mountains. That there's some place where your body says, I recognize this as home. And we really do need that. And it is disappearing very, very quickly.
I think so too.
Yeah.
In this busy people thing that you've identified, I think very, very accurately, you talk about wearing these beepers as badges of, I guess they're status symbols.
They're status symbols. I'm important. Someone's looking for me.
Right.
I must be here 24/7.
All right. What do you think, what's behind that? When you've done your research or your stories, why is this happening?
It's a very interesting question, why we will give ourselves away like that. And I think that it comes down to something very, very simple. Every human being wants respect and love. Every single one of us. And when the culture says you're respectable and lovable when you're a busy, important person, we do wear it as a kind of badge of honor. And people compete with each other. You know, they think, you think you're busy.
Right.
I took 67 plane flights last month, and they start to really whine and complain. And my very, very dear friend, Loretta LaRoche, who I know you know, who is a humorist with a lot of 4 PBS specials, Loretta always says, what will it say on your tombstone? Got everything done, dead anyway?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Well, you mentioned the PBS special, and you have one also.
I do.
And what is the message that you're trying to give there?
That special was based on Inner Peace for Busy People. And what I was really trying to do was give people just a few little tips that they could use in the context of their busy life to help themselves slow down and come back to their center. The idea being, a lot of people won't slow down because they think it will somehow trash their creativity. That's not true. You know, a little bit of stress makes you more productive, but once you're overstressed, your productivity goes down the drain. And very simple things like just adjusting your breathing can change your physiology, change your attitude. Most of us know this, but we don't do it. So it was for the person who says, what can I do? That's what the special was for.
Mm-hmm. Other than this breathing, what other ideas do you think people can do to, I guess, find themselves again, get centered?
I think one of the most important things is gratitude. If you look at the bestseller list, there's almost always some book that deals with gratitude. When Sarah Braun Bronick's work came out, Oprah really picked up on that. And then people were keeping gratitude journals. If you're grateful, Carol, what that does is it opens up your senses, your eyes and your ears, and suddenly you notice the perfume of the morning, and you notice the way that a bird is gliding through the air, and you might notice the special smile on the face of a child in an elevator, which I did this morning, or the color of her hair. And it brings you into the moment. So every psychological and spiritual tradition will tell you that what's most important is that you have to cultivate awareness so that you don't live in the mind habits and negativity and like what will happen later. And they have to become as a little child again, present right here and right now. And that's what gratitude does. It makes you mindful, aware, and present. And ultimately, it's one of the greatest psychological and spiritual practices.
But is it also in your medical training a health benefit?
Oh, there's no question about it, because if you look at stress, for the most part, stress has to do with the stories that we are telling ourselves. When we say, I should have done that, boy, I was stupid that I didn't do something else. Or then we go into the future and we think, well, you know, I may be fine now, but what if I get sick later? Or what if I get fired later? Or what if my kids get into trouble? Or what if I never have any kids? Or whatever your thing is. And because our body cannot tell the difference between what we're imagining and what is happening, we create for ourselves sometimes really unhealthy hormonal cascades of stress that depress the immune system, for example, and nothing is happening but our thoughts. When you come into the moment, then you elicit what my old mentor, Dr. Herbert Benson, who really studied the physiology of meditation, calls the relaxation response, the body's antagonist to the fight or flight response, and that brings the body to balance, to homeostasis. So being in the moment is the healthiest thing you can do for yourself.
Okay, and then do you have any other suggestions about trying to eliminate this busy thing?
There are really
prioritizations.
You know,
do you have a checklist in your book? I mean,
I think there are two major things, and one of them is managing the life that you have now. And in Inner Peace for Busy People, I look at strategies to manage the mind, the kind of thing we're talking about. How do you quit awfulizing? How do you come into the moment? Strategies for things like gratitude, as we were talking about. Strategies for making fun of yourself, which I learned from Loretta. Loretta makes a point. She says, life is a joke and you're it. And, you know, you can really, if you exaggerate your own crazy tendencies, then what happens is that you find yourself funny, and it's a way of getting distance. There are chapters in there about the creation of meaning. There are little practices. What would happen if you spent 5 minutes in the morning doing something that really connected you? I have a 5-minute morning practice, which is a Hebrew chant, a little kind of Tai Chi form where I greet the day, the four directions, nature. It's wonderful. You don't have to do 2 hours of meditation, yoga, and inspirational reading. So the book has many things like that, but that's only one thing. Strategies to deal with the life you've got. I think periodically, each one of us comes to a point where we reevaluate the life we have. And we say, do I really want to do this job? Does it nourish me? Or then we say, you know, how about these relationships? Do they nourish me? And that's whenever there's a tragedy or a crisis in our life, that's when we start to reevaluate at that level. And I think women in midlife often go through that kind of evaluation and say, I'm too busy. I'm too busy. I need to change my whole life to have more time for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm in that phase now. So maybe the next book is going to be, how do you change your life and get it back?
Yeah, and if you get it back, what are you going to do with it?
That's exactly right.
You only have so much time. I think a lot of people get sick, and that's how they end up. If their mind is not smart enough to stop them, their body will stop them.
That's right.
Is that you find?
Mm-hmm. I do. And you know, you look in other cultures. For example, Hindu culture, they say there's a certain phase in life for everything. That there's a phase for working hard, but then at a certain point, after you've worked for a number of years, after the children are grown, you enter the phase they call going into the forest, which is a time of making meaning of your life, of developing your spiritual life. And, you know, maybe we're programmed for that.
Maybe we're living long enough for it, too.
Yes.
So I really appreciate your being with us. It's been a delight to talk with you. I hope you have enjoyed the program. Thank you for joining us today. This has been Writer to Writer, brought to you by Florida Community College at Jacksonville. And this has been Dr. Joan Borysenko, who has been giving us a wonderful bunch of pointers, I think, and 15 books and 15 years of wonderful things to read. Thank you very much.